It's official. After several weeks of rumor and speculation, Jimmy Butler will be leaving the Miami Heat in one of the nastiest NBA breakups that I've ever seen. And this isn't the first time that Jimmy Butler has pulled something like this. In fact, it feels as though wherever Jimmy Butler goes, he ends up leaving that franchise in disarray. We could take a look at his stint in Chicago, where he played the first 6 years of his career. You see, Jimmy Butler was drafted by the Chicago Bulls with the 30th overall pick in the 2011 draft. The Bulls decided to go and take a chance on the local boy, and while they didn't give him too much playing time early on, eventually Thibodeau realized how good of a player he had on his hands. And once he figured that out, well, he ran him into the ground. Because if you know anything about Tom Thibodeau, it's that he's going to play his best players the most amount of minutes possible. And during his time with the Chicago Bulls, Jimmy Butler really saw improvement. Jimmy Butler's first 4 years were filled with nothing but constant leaps towards greatness. And by 2015, Jimmy Butler was an all-star who had averaged 38.7 minutes a night, had won most improved, and was one hell of a defender because he was constantly up there in DPOY voting. And by Jimmy Butler's final year in Chicago, well, he had played 76 games. He had went out and averaged 37 minutes a night. It didn't matter that there was a new coach in Chicago because Jimmy Butler was the only good damn player on that roster right before he left. In fact, he was averaging 23.9 points a night, had 6.2 rebounds, and had a career high at the time in 5.5 assists while shooting 45% from the field and a solid 36% from the three. Efficiency has never really been Jimmy Butler's strong suit, especially at the beginning of his career, but the issues that arose in Chicago were the fact that the Bulls were missing the playoffs. And one of the few warning signs that Jimmy Butler would be out the door is that the season prior, the Bulls had traded Derrick Rose to the New York Knicks. And with Jimmy Butler looking the way he did, the Bulls didn't believe that he could be the number one on a championship team. So when the season came to an end and the Bulls got bounced in the first round, the Bulls decided, well, Garpax especially, felt like Jimmy Butler needed to go, and they just needed to hit the rebuild button. Now, the Bulls front office not seeing Jimmy Butler as a true number one wasn't the only reason he got traded. There was also a massive feud going on between Jimmy Butler and then head coach Fred Hoiberg. And Butler had made it very known to just about everybody in that organization he hated the guy. But for the most part, this little situation in Chicago wasn't his fault. It had to fall on the team and the decisions they were making at the time, very bad ones. However, the same can't be said for Jimmy Butler's second stint, which just so happened to be in Minnesota. Now, Jimmy Butler didn't really get to pick where he got traded to. It was more like the Bulls went out and made the trade that was best for the team. So he ends up landing in Minnesota. No one really wants to go play in Minnesota. In fact, that team had only won 31 games the year prior. So this was a bit of a punishment by the Bulls organization. Jimmy Butler does his best to pull Minnesota out of the mud. And the team actually ends up winning 47 games, which is a 16-win improvement from the year prior. However, they would get bounced out in the first round. Even though Jimmy Butler was an all-star in his first year, he played 59 games, played just about every game to its fullest because he averaged 36 minutes, and it also helped that Tom Thibodeau, his former coach, was the coach for the Timberwolves at the time. And Jimmy Butler had averaged a good 22 points a night, had a total 5.3 rebounds, and 4.9 assists with 2 steals. So he was still an all-caliber defender when he had reached Minnesota. However, trouble started to arise in Jimmy Butler's second year with the team because Jimmy Butler had been severely underpaid up to that point in his career and he wanted a bag. However, Thibodeau wasn't willing to negotiate with Jimmy Butler on a new contract at the time, so Jimmy Butler was pissed at the organization and he made that known out the gate. Of course, everybody knows about the infamous Timberwolves practice, and I think it's best told by one of the former players, Jeff Teague, on his podcast. You see, in Jeff Teague's reiteration of the story, well, he starts it off by saying, "So we're at practice one day. Jimmy ain't come to no workouts. Workouts start in September. We don't see Jimmy. Nobody's talking to Jimmy. I haven't heard a word from Jimmy. Then 3 days after training camp started, Jimmy shows up. We think he's gonna practice. He ain't practicing with us. We're running laps, we're diving for loose balls, and Jimmy's out there stretching and getting massages. Then finally, Tom Thibodeau says scrimmage is going to begin. He asked for all the starters to be on one team. Jimmy said, I ain't playing with them. Instead, he turns to the bad news bears, as Jeff Teague put it, guys who just weren't going to make the team. And off the rip, Jimmy is talking shit the whole time, especially to Karl Anthony Towns. He goes in on Karl Anthony Towns, calls him soft, calls him weak, and says at the end of it that y'all motherfuckers better pay me. I'm like that. He says it in front of the GM, who he knows is watching this scrimmage. And it also helped that Jimmy Butler beat the entire starting lineup with a bunch of bums. And that's essentially the story in a summed up 1-minute version of it. And of course, when something like that happens in practice, well, Jimmy Butler is either getting paid, which sets a very bad example for the rest of the roster, or Jimmy Butler is getting traded. And so, after only playing 10 games for the Minnesota Timberwolves that year, honestly, I'm surprised he even played that much, he ends up getting traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for a whole lot of nothing. I mean, the 76ers only gave up Robert Covington, Dario Saric, Jared Bayless, and a 2022 second-round draft pick. What the Wolves wanted to do was get Jimmy Butler the hell off the team because he was ruining the chemistry. And we'll talk more about Jimmy Butler's time in Philadelphia in a second, but for right now, I wanted to slow the video down, remind you guys to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 10,000. Every subscription is greatly appreciated. Alright, now let's get back to talking about Jimmy Butler and his time with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I believe this was one of the more interesting eras in Butler's career. You see, the main reason that Jimmy Butler left the Timberwolves was because he wanted to get paid. However, the 76ers didn't see eye to eye with Jimmy Butler on this. In fact, the real reason that the 76ers traded for Butler was because they were in a win-now mode and felt like Butler was nothing more than a one-year rental. And so, in that 1 year, Jimmy Butler balled out for the team. He played 55 games, he had 18 points on the field, he had 4 assists, 5.3 rebounds, and shot 46%. Now, Jimmy Butler didn't score a whole lot this season because those roles were pretty much filled up. I mean, they had a Joel Embiid coming into his own. He was averaging 27 points a night. This was one of the first great years for Joel Embiid. And Ben Simmons was starting to look really good. And they also had Tobias Harris. And I mentioned Tobias Harris because he is one of the main reasons Jimmy Butler ends up leaving the Philadelphia 76ers. But anyway, in the 1 year that Jimmy Butler spent with the 76ers, they went from losing in the conference semifinals to losing in the conference semifinals. Though they did look a whole lot better in the regular season, and I do believe that this team could have won a championship if they had stuck together, the 76ers decided to pay Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. One of the biggest mistakes that this franchise would ever make, and one that I believe is the reason that the 76ers didn't win any rings in their Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons era. Anyway, Jimmy Butler ends up leaving the Philadelphia 76ers in free agency. And let me tell you, at the end of the year, he made it well known that he was pissed at the 76ers because he also felt like if this core had stuck together, they could have won a ring. But anyway, he ends up signing with the Miami Heat, the place he's been for the last 6 years, his second true home after leaving the Chicago Bulls. And it really feels like Jimmy Butler came into his own. This was the first real chance Jimmy Butler had at being a number one on the team. And what does Jimmy Butler do in his first season with Miami? He wills that team to an NBA Finals. He makes an All-Star appearance for the first time in a few years. He's in MVP convos. He's an All-Star. The next season, he's DPOY candidate. And he continues this little stint of being phenomenal, not only in the playoffs, but he also put in some work in the regular season. You see, during this era in Jimmy Butler's career, he was known as a bit of a slacker. From the outside looking in, it felt as though Jimmy Butler didn't really turn it up until the team reached the playoffs. And the team had a very high winning percentage in the playoffs when Jimmy Butler was there. I mean, they made it to 2 NBA Finals in Jimmy Butler's first few seasons with the team, though you wouldn't really see any consistent effort out of Jimmy Butler for the entirety of the regular season. And for the most part, Jimmy Butler did pretty good. He averaged a solid 21 points a night while with the Miami Heat, had about 5 rebounds every season, along with 5 assists, and this is when Jimmy Butler's efficiency went through the roof. He was shooting in the high 49s. In fact, in 2023, Jimmy Butler shot 53% from the field while playing 64 games, and he's doing this in his early to mid 30s. so it isn't like Jimmy Butler was going to fall off anytime soon. The Miami Heat were the first team to take a chance on Jimmy and give him that huge contract, and he had made it known several times that he was going to be a Heater for life. But in the last few seasons, the Miami Heat have failed to make any big moves to help bolster this lineup. Sure, the team was great, they had been to a few NBA Finals, but if they wanted to win a damn championship, they were gonna need to get him more star power. And offseason after offseason, trade deadline after trade deadline, the team just didn't make a move. Pat Riley felt like the roster didn't need to change, and that's when this real beef between Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler really started. And that beef has been swelling up for the past 2 years and has finally exploded over these last few weeks. And that's why Jimmy Butler is now leaving the Miami Heat. And I think that Jimmy Butler kind of took it too far in a few instances. I think there were times where Jimmy Butler could have acted more mature. However, looking at it from Butler's perspective, Pat Riley comes out and tells him to shut up and play basketball, tells him that he needs to put in more effort, and that's just a whole lot of disrespect. That's why Jimmy Butler has made it known that he just wants his joy to come back when he plays basketball. He came out and said that he's willing to play for just about 29 other teams. As long as he's not on the Miami Heat, he will be happy. And this leads us into present day. Now, a trade hasn't happened, but by the time this video is released, you'll probably know where Jimmy Butler is now. And I think that's it for this video. Really just wanted to cover Jimmy Butler and his career, basically, because he has been a bit of a drama queen wherever he goes. But like I said, that's about it for this video, so I'll catch y'all later. Much love.